Commander Lyra stood on the bridge of her starship and watched the blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen, and she had been traveling for 6 months to reach this world, and her mission was simple, but she felt uneasy about it. And beside, her 2 enormous dragons rested in their special chambers, and Ember was red like fire, and Frost was white like ice, and they had been her companions for 300 years. The ship moved through the darkness of space and passed by a small moon, and Lyra could see structures on its surface, and the humans had been busy building things, and she had studied their history during the journey, and these people were young compared to other species in the galaxy, and they had only discovered faster than light travel 20 years ago, and yet they had already spread to several planets in their system. Her assistant Kira approached and handed her a data tablet, and the elven woman was young and nervous, and Commander, the Council fleet is waiting at the edge of the system, and Admiral Vex wants to know when you will deliver the message. Lyra took the tablet and looked at the information, and 40 warships surrounded this solar system, and each one carried enough firepower to destroy a moon, and the Galactic Council had sent this force to make sure Earth understood the message. And tell the Admiral I will contact the humans within the hour. Kira bowed and left, and Lyra turned back to the viewing screen, and she had delivered the Council's ultimatum to 8 worlds before this one, and every world had surrendered without a fight, and they had no choice really. And the Council controlled most of the galaxy, and their rules were simple, and new species must submit to Council authority, or face destruction. But something felt different about Earth, and Lyra had read their history and seen their wars and watched recordings of their art and music, and these humans were fighters, and they did not give up easily, and she wondered if they would be foolish enough to resist. Ember spoke in her mind, and the mental connection between dragon and rider was ancient magic. And you are worried about these humans. She touched the warm scales on his neck through the chamber wall. And I am worried. We are making a mistake. Frost joined the conversation, and her voice was sharp and cold. And the Council does not make mistakes. And these primitive creatures should be grateful. We are offering them a place in galactic society. Lyra smiled sadly, and her dragon saw things differently than she did, and they had been born free and had chosen to bond with her, but the elven people had not been given a choice, and 300 years ago the Council had come to her world and demanded surrender, and her people had fought for 10 years and lost everything, and Lyra had watched her home city burn and her family die, and in the end the elves had no choice but to serve. She had become a commander in the Council fleet, and proven herself in battle, and earned respect, but deep inside she remembered what it felt like to be free, and she remembered the anger and helplessness when her world knelt before the Council. The communication system beeped, and a voice came through speaking the human language called English and unknown vessel. This is Earth Defense Command, and identify yourself and state your purpose. Lyra pressed the response button and spoke in perfect English. And I am Commander Lyra of the Galactic Council, and I carry an important message for your leaders, and I request permission to land and meet with them. There was silence for several seconds, and then the voice returned, and permission granted and transmitting coordinates now, and a delegation will meet you too. Hours later, Lyra's shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and she sat in the pilot's seat with Ember and Frost curled behind her, and the dragons were too large to fit comfortably in the shuttle, but they refused to let her go alone and through. The window she could see clouds and oceans and continents, and the planet was beautiful and reminded her of her lost home. The shuttle landed at a military base, and soldiers in gray uniforms surrounded it, and their weapons were pointed at her ship. And Lyra stood and straightened her dark blue Council uniform and checked that her weapon was secured at her belt, and Ember and Frost moved to flank her. When the shuttle door opened, the soldiers tensed and their fingers on triggers, but there, Commander held up a hand and wait for my signal. Lyra walked down the ramp and her dragons followed, and Ember was as large as a small house, and Frost was slightly smaller, and their scales gleamed in the sunlight, and soldiers gasped, and some stepped back, and no one on Earth had ever seen dragons before. A woman walked forward, and she wore a uniform with many medals, and her dark hair was pulled back and her brown eyes were calm. And I am Captain Helen Martinez, and welcome to Earth, Commander. Lyra bowed slightly. And it is an honor to meet you, Captain, and I apologize for the dramatic entrance, and my companions insisted on joining me. Martinez looked at the dragons and smiled. And they are magnificent, and please follow me, and our leaders are waiting. They walked through the base and soldiers stared as they passed and whispered to each other, and Lyra heard words like dragon and elf and alien, and she was used to such reactions, and Martinez led them to a large building and took them down an elevator that descended deep underground. The elevator opened into a long hallway, and they walked to a conference room, and inside were 4 humans sitting at a table, and Martinez made introductions, and this is Admiral Grace Thompson and Dr. Lisa Chen and General Patrick Moore and Director Andrew Blake. Lyra nodded to each of them and studied their faces, and Thompson was older with silver hair and sharp eyes, and Chen was younger and wore civilian clothes, and Moore was a large man with scars on his face, and Blake was thin and wore dark glasses. "Please sit, Commander," and Thompson said, and gesturing to a chair. "And you said you have a message for us." Lyra remained standing, and her dragons moved to either side of her, and I bring greetings from the Galactic Council, and also a demand, and she paused and watching their reactions, and the Council has observed your species and determined that you pose a potential threat to galactic peace, and therefore Earth must surrender its sovereignty and accept Council governance. The room went silent and no one moved, and Martinez stood behind Lyra and her hand near her weapon, and finally Moore leaned forward, and his voice was rough. "And what happens if we refuse?" Lyra had answered this question 8 times before, and the answer was always the same, and if you refuse, then the Council fleet will destroy your space stations and orbital facilities and blockade your planet, and you will be prisoners on your own world until you submit. Chen spoke next, and her voice was soft. "And how many other species has the Council conquered this way?" "All of them." And Lyra replied, "And every species in the Council was given the same choice, and all chose to survive." Thompson stood and walked to a wall screen and activated it, and images appeared, showing ships and weapons and construction yards, and Commander Lyra. "And we have been expecting this visit, and we detected your scout ships 5 years ago, and we have prepared." Lyra stared at the images on the screen and felt her confidence waver, and the display showed hundreds of weapons platforms orbiting Earth and Mars in the asteroid belt, and massive shipyards near the moon and construction facilities on several moons of the outer planets, and this was impossible, and new species were never this prepared. Admiral Thompson touched the controls, and more images appeared, and these are our kinetic missile batteries, and we have 16,000 of them positioned throughout the system, and each one can accelerate to 0.3 light speed, and she paused. "And we also have 12 experimental weapons that we prefer not to discuss." General Moore stood and walked to stand beside Thompson, "And for the past 5 years, we have done nothing but prepare for your arrival, and we studied every piece of information we could find about the Council, and your tactics and your technology and your weaknesses." Lyra found her voice, "And you cannot win against 40 warships, and the Council has crushed rebellions before, and you are one small planet director." Blake spoke for the first time, and his voice was cold. "And you assume we fight alone, and that is incorrect." Before Lyra could ask what he meant, Dr. Chen activated another display, and this one showed star charts, and red dots marked several systems near Earth, and we have been in contact with other species, and some who the Council conquered, and some who remain hidden, and they are tired of the Council's rule, and if war begins here it will spread. Ember growled in Lyra's mind, "And these humans are clever, and they have prepared a trap." Frost was less impressed, "And they are still primitives, and 40 warships will sweep them aside." But Lyra was not so certain, and she had seen the determination in the humans' eyes and remembered the same look in her own people's eyes 300 years ago, and the difference was, Earth had time to prepare, and her people had not. Captain Martinez moved to stand in front of Lyra, and her hand still near her weapon. "And Commander, you have delivered your message, and now I will give you ours. And humanity does not kneel, and we will not surrender our freedom. And if the Council wants Earth, they will have to take it by force." The room was silent except for the hum of electronics, and Lyra thought about her orders, and she was supposed to get their surrender or leave and let the fleet attack, and Admiral Vex was waiting for her signal, but something made her hesitate. "May I ask you a question?" and Lyra said quietly. Thompson nodded and asked, "Why do you resist when you know you might lose everything and your people could die? And your cities could burn, and is freedom worth that price?" It was Chen who answered, and her voice gentle but firm. "And Commander, have you ever been free?" Lyra felt the words cut deep. "And yes, and a long time ago." and before the council came to my world. Then, you know the answer, and Chen said, and freedom is not just worth dying for, and it is worth living for and fighting for and sacrificing for, and without it, we are just animals. In a cage, Lyra looked at each human face and saw no fear, and only resolve. And she had delivered ultimatums to 8 worlds and seen despair and terror and acceptance but never this. And these humans knew they might lose and knew they might die. And yet they stood. Firm, General Moore walked to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle and glasses, and I think we could all use a drink, and he poured amber liquid into 5 glasses and handed them around and held one out to Lyra and to warriors who understand the cost of freedom. Lyra took the glass and the liquid burned her throat but warmed her chest, and Moore smiled, and that is Kentucky bourbon, and 150 years old and saved for special occasions. They sat around the table and the tension eased slightly, and Blake asked about the council, and Lyra told them about the vast empire that controlled thousands of worlds, and the council itself was made up of the oldest and most powerful species, and they made laws and enforced them with overwhelming military force, and you serve them willingly. And Martinez asked. Lyra looked down at her glass, and no, and not willingly. And my world fought the council for 10 years, and we lost, and I watched my family die and my city burn, and in the end we had no choice. And I joined the fleet to protect what remained of my people. Thompson leaned forward, and her eyes sharp. And then why do you still serve, and your people are safe now, and you could leave? Where would I go? And Lyra asked. And the council controls the galaxy, and there is nowhere to hide. Blake smiled, and that is about to change. Before Lyra could respond, alarms began to sound throughout the facility, and red lights flashed, and a voice came over speakers saying, Council fleet is moving into attack formation, and all defense systems activate. Moore jumped up and checked a display on his wrist. And they are not waiting for your report. Commander and Admiral Vex is bringing his ships into firing range. Thompson stood and looked at Lyra. And you need to leave now and get back to your ship, and this is about to become very dangerous. But Lyra did not move, and Ember and Frost were tense and ready, and she thought about 300 years of service, and 300 years of watching worlds kneel, and 300 years of remembering what freedom felt like. Captain Martinez put her hand on Lyra's shoulder and go, Commander, and you delivered your message, and your duty is done, and save yourself. Lyra stood and looked at the human woman and then at the others, and they were preparing to fight and preparing to die and defending their home and their freedom, and she thought about her own world and wondered what would have happened if they had more time to prepare and more allies and more courage. Ember spoke in her mind, and what does your heart tell you, Ryder? She remembered her mother singing to her as a child, and her father teaching her to fly with young dragons, and her sister laughing in the garden, and all of them dead because the council demanded obedience, and she had spent 3 centuries serving the ones who destroyed everything she loved. Lyra reached up and grabbed the council insignia on her uniform and tore it off and dropped it on the table. And my dragons and I stand with Earth. The room went silent, and everyone stared at her, and Martinez spoke first. And are you certain? And there is no going back from this. I have served the council for 300 years, and Lyra said, and her voice strong, and I am tired of serving cowards and tired of watching free people kneel. And if humanity stands against the council, then I stand with humanity. Thompson smiled, and it was fierce and welcome to the rebellion. Commander, and we can use a warrior with your experience. More alarms sounded, and Moore checked his displays, and first wave incoming, and council ships are firing. The building shook as something exploded far above them, and Blake activated multiple screens, showing the space around Earth, and council warships were advancing and firing energy. Weapons and missiles, but Earth's defenses were responding, and platforms launched thousands of kinetic projectiles, and the vacuum of space filled with fire and debris. Chen watched the screens and counted, and 3 council ships destroyed and 2 damaged, and our losses are 7 platforms and 15 satellites. The battle had begun, and Lyra had chosen her side, and for the first time in 300 years, she felt alive. The underground facility shook again, and dust fell from the ceiling. And on the screens, council warships pressed their attack, and their energy beams cut through space like burning swords, and 3 more human defense platforms exploded into fragments. And but for every platform destroyed, 2 council ships took damage. From the swarms of kinetic missiles, Admiral Thompson stood at the main console and gave orders calmly, and redirect Battery 7 to target the flagship, and activate the lunar cannons and move Squadron 3 to intercept their left flank. Lyra watched, in amazement, and she had fought in many battles for the Council but never against them. And the humans fought with precision and coordination that impressed her, and they used their inferior numbers wisely, and made every shot count. General Moore pointed at a screen, and their command ship is pulling back, and Admiral Vex is not used to taking damage. Captain Martinez turned to Lyra and, Vex, and what will he do next? Lyra thought about the Admiral, and she had served under him for 50 years, and he is proud and arrogant, and he will try to overwhelm you with a direct assault, and he believes superior firepower always wins. Then we give him what he expects. And Thompson said, and she activated a communication channel, and all units, prepare for concentrated assault and fall back to defensive line Omega on. The screens, the human ships and platforms began retreating toward Earth, and the Council fleet saw this as weakness, and Admiral Vex ordered his ships to pursue, and they accelerated forward and their weapons blazing. Blake watched the enemy positions and smiled, and they are taking the bait. Wait for it. And Thompson said quietly, and her eyes on the tactical display. And wait. The Council ships crossed an invisible line in space, and suddenly hundreds of hidden weapons platforms activated, and they had been disguised as debris and asteroids and satellites, and all of them fired at once, and the Council fleet found itself in a crossfire. Lyra watched as 5 warships exploded simultaneously, and 2 more were crippled, and Vex had led his ships into a trap, and she almost felt sorry for him. And almost more let out a victory shout. And that is how you fight a superior force. But the celebration was brief, and the Council fleet was damaged but not defeated, and 30 ships remained, and they regrouped and began a more cautious advance. And Vex had learned his lesson. Dr. Chen reviewed damage reports, and we lost 40% of our platforms, and ammunition reserves are at 60%, and we cannot sustain this rate of combat. Martinez looked at Lyra, and how long before reinforcements arrive? The nearest Council fleet is 3 weeks away, and Lyra said, but Vex will have called for them already. And if we can survive until then, more ships will come. Thompson nodded, and then we need to change the game. And she turned to Blake and activate the experimental weapons. Blake hesitated, and they are not fully tested, and we do not know if they will work. We are out of options, and Thompson said, and do it. Blake typed commands into his console and across the system. Strange devices began to power up, and they had been built in secret over 5 years, and based on theories that human scientists barely understood, and 3 of them were positioned near Jupiter, and 2 near Saturn, and 1 hidden in the asteroid belt. The devices activated, and space itself seemed to twist and ripple, and an invisible wave spread out from each device, and when the wave touched Council ships, something unexpected happened, and their shields flickered and died, and their weapons stopped firing, and their engines went dark. On the screens, 30 warships went silent and drifting in space without power. Moore stared in disbelief. And what just happened? Blake checked his instruments, and the quantum disruptors worked, and they create a field that disrupts exotic energy patterns, and essentially they turn off any technology based on zero-point energy. Lyra understood immediately, and the Council has used zero-point technology for thousands of years, and all their ships and weapons depend on it, and you just turned it all off. For how long? And Martinez asked. Blake shook his head, and we do not know, and the effect could last minutes or hours or days, and we have never tested it on this scale. Then we use this time wisely. And Thompson said, and launch all remaining missiles and target their command ship first. The human weapons platforms fired, and thousands of kinetic projectiles accelerated toward the helpless Council fleet, and without shields the warships were vulnerable, and explosions rippled across the enemy formation, and ships broke apart, and crews died. And within minutes 20 Council ships were destroyed. Lyra felt sick watching it, and she had friends on those ships, and elves and humans and dozens of other species, and all of them serving the Council because they had no choice, and now they were dying because of that service. Ember felt her distress, and you made the right choice, Ryder, did I? And Lyra whispered. And those were people and not just enemies. Frost was less sympathetic, and they would have killed these humans without hesitation. And war is not pretty. The attack continued, and when it ended, only 6 Council ships remained intact, and their power slowly returning as the quantum disruptor effect faded and Admiral Vex was among the survivors and his flagship damaged. But Functional Thompson opened a communication channel, and Admiral Vex, this is Admiral Grace Thompson of Earth Defense Command, and you have lost 34 ships and your fleet is broken and withdraw now and we will not pursue. The response came after a long pause and Vex's voice was filled with rage. And you have won this battle, human, and but the Council will send more ships and hundreds of them, and Earth will burn for this insult. Martinez spoke before Thompson could respond, and Admiral Vex, this is Captain Helen Martinez, and Commander Lyra is with us now, and she has chosen freedom over slavery, and others will follow her example, and your empire is built on fear, and fear can only last so long. There was silence, and then Vex said, and Lyra, you have betrayed your oath and betrayed your people, and when we return you will watch Earth die, and then you will die. Lyra stepped forward and spoke into the communication system, and I betrayed nothing, Admiral, and I remember my oath, and it was to protect my people, and the Council destroyed my people, and I have served the ones who murdered my family for 300 years, and no more. She paused, and then continued, and you are right that the Council will send more ships, but Earth will not stand alone. And I know where other conquered species wait for hope, and I know how to contact them. And this war is just beginning. Vex did not respond, and his remaining ships turned and accelerated away from Earth and limping toward the edge of the system, and the battle was over. The facility erupted in cheers, and soldiers hugged each other, and officers shook hands, and Chen had tears in her eyes, and Moore was laughing, and Blake just sat quietly and looked exhausted. Thompson walked over to Lyra and held out her hand. And thank you, Commander. And you gave us information that helped us prepare, and whether you knew it or not. Lyra was confused, and I did not give you anything. Blake spoke up, and when we detected your scout ships 5 years ago, we captured one, and the pilot was an elf named Kale, and he was dying from his injuries. But before he died, he told us everything and about the Council and their tactics and their technology. And he said to tell any elves we met that some of us never stopped fighting. Lyra felt her legs go weak, and Kale was my brother. I am sorry. And Blake said quietly, and he died helping us prepare. And he was brave. Lyra sat down and put her face in her hands, and Kale had been captured, and she thought he died in an accident, and the Council had lied to her, and for 5 years her brother had been dead, and she never knew. Ember and Frost pressed against her, and their warmth comforting, and Martinez knelt beside her, and your brother gave us a chance, and we used it. And now we have a chance to free others and to finish what he started. Lyra looked up and wiped her eyes. And what do we do now? Thompson smiled, and now we prepare for the real war, and because the Council will not forgive this, and they will come with everything they have. Then we need allies. And Lyra said, and standing up, and I know 12 species that hate the Council, and I know where they are, hidden, and I know how to contact them. Moore grinned, and then let us build an army. The first battle was won, but the war had just begun, and Earth had declared its independence, and Commander Lyra had found a new purpose, and together they would challenge an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. 3 weeks after the battle, Lyra stood on the bridge of a human warship called the Defiance, and they were approaching a hidden moon in a system the Council had marked as empty. But Lyra knew better, and this moon held a secret colony of Tarkesh refugees and a species of insect, like people who had fled Council rule 50 years ago. Captain Martinez commanded the ship, and beside her stood Admiral Thompson and General Moore and Dr. Chen, and they had all agreed to join this first diplomatic mission, and Earth needed allies quickly, and Council reinforcements would arrive within 2 months. Lyra watched the moon grow larger on the screen, and she had been here once before on a Council patrol, and she had discovered the colony by accident, but instead of reporting it, she had kept the secret, and the Tarkesh had been grateful. And their queen had given Lyra a communication crystal and told her to use it if she ever needed help. Now she held that crystal and activated it, and a holographic image appeared showing a Tarkesh warrior, and its 4 arms holding weapons and its compound eyes studying them. I am Lyra, and she said in the Tarkesh language, and I seek audience with Queen Zara. The warrior clicked its mandibles, and the traitor elf and Queen Zara said you might come and she will see you. The Defiance landed in a hidden valley, and dozens of Tarkesh warriors surrounded the ship and their weapons ready. And Lyra walked down the ramp with Ember and Frost, and the dragons made the warriors nervous, but they did not retreat. A larger Tarkesh approached, and she wore a crown of crystal, and her carapace was deep blue. And I am Queen Zara, and you bring humans to my hidden home, Lyra, and this is dangerous. These humans fight the council, and Lyra said, and they defeated a council fleet 3 weeks ago, and they seek allies. Zara studied Martinez and Thompson and more, and humans are young and reckless, and why should we trust them? Martinez stepped forward, and because we share a common enemy, and because freedom is worth fighting for, and because alone we will all eventually fall. But together we have a chance. Zara clicked thoughtfully, and pretty words human, but words are easy, and the council has hunted my people for 5 decades, and we have lost thousands hiding in the shadows. And why should we risk everything for your war? It is not just our war. And Thompson said, and it is everyone's war, and the council will not stop until every species kneels and every world obeys, and you can hide here for another 50 years. Or you can fight back. Chen pulled out a data pad and showed images of the battle. And this is what happened. When the council demanded Earth surrender, and we destroyed 34 of their warships, and the council is not invincible. The Tarkesh queen watched the battle footage, and her eyes widening, and you killed so many, and with inferior technology we were prepared, and more said, and we were willing to die for our freedom, and that made the difference. Zara looked at Lyra, and you truly stand with these humans? I do, and Lyra replied, and I am tired of serving the council and tired of watching free people suffer, and my brother died helping Earth prepare, and I will honor his sacrifice. The queen was silent for a long time, and then she said, and the Tarkesh will join your alliance. But we have only 12 ships, and they are old and damaged ships, can be repaired, and Martinez said, and we have resources and technology to share. And together we are stronger. Over the next month, Lyra and the human delegation visited 6 more hidden colonies, and they found the Vorin, who were energy beings, trapped in mechanical bodies, and the Kelf, who were aquatic and had lost their ocean world, and the Drex, who were silicon-based life forms, and each species had suffered under council rule, and each had been hiding and waiting for hope. Some agreed to join immediately, and others needed convincing, and the Vorin leader named Pulse was suspicious and asked many questions, and Moore showed them human weapons technology, and Chen shared medical advances, and Blake offered the quantum disruptor. Designs Pulse studied the information, and you would share this technology freely. We share with allies, and Thompson said. And because hoarding knowledge makes us weak and sharing it makes us strong. The Vorin joined, and they contributed 18 ships and advanced energy weapons. The Kelf were reluctant until Lyra told them about her brother and about choosing to fight rather than hide, and their leader named Wave. Song wept and said, and we thought we were alone, and we thought everyone had forgotten. Us, you are not alone. And Martinez said, and you are not forgotten, and join us and help us remind the galaxy what freedom means. The Kelf brought 8 ships and powerful defensive shields. The Drex were warriors, and they agreed immediately, and their commander named Stonebreaker said, and finally a chance to make the council bleed, and we have waited 70 years for this. By the end of the month, they had recruited 9 species and gained 67 ships and thousands of soldiers, and engineers and scientists in Earth began training them and sharing technology and building a real alliance. Dr. Chen worked with alien scientists to combine technologies, and human kinetic weapons merged with Vorin energy systems and Tarkesh. Armor plating reinforced human ships, and Kelf shields protected orbital platforms, and the alliance grew stronger each day. But time was running out, and long-range sensors detected a massive council fleet approaching, and 200 warships led by 3 dreadnoughts, and Admiral Vex wanted revenge, and he brought enough firepower to burn Earth to ash. Admiral Thompson called a council meeting, and all the alliance leaders gathered in a conference room deep underground on Earth, and holographic projections showed the approaching enemy fleet. We have 6 weeks before they arrive, and Thompson said, and we cannot win a direct battle, and 200 ships against 80, and even with our preparations, we will be overwhelmed. Queen Zara clicked. Agreement, and the council dreadnoughts alone could destroy our entire fleet, and this is suicide. Then we do not fight them here, and Lyra said, and all eyes turned to her, and we take the fight to them. Moore leaned forward and explained Lyra activated a star chart, and the council fleet is coming from their fortress at Terminus Station. and it is their main military base in this sector. And if we strike there, we force them to choose between attacking Earth and defending their base. That is insane." And Blake said, "And Terminus Station has orbital weapons and shields and thousands of soldiers, and we do not have enough ships. We do not need to conquer it." And Lyra replied, "And we just need to threaten it and make it hurt. And the Council values their bases more than they value conquered worlds, and if Terminus is in danger, they will recall the fleet." Martinez stood and walked to the star chart. "And how well do you know this station, Commander? I served there for 20 years, and Lyra said, and I know every defense and every weakness, and I know how to hurt them." Stonebreaker laughed, "And a sound like grinding rocks, and I like this plan, and let us bring war to the Council instead of waiting for them." Pulse spoke carefully, "And the risk is enormous, and if we fail, we lose everything, and our ships and our people and our hope. If we hide, we lose anyway." And Wavesong said, "And the sea teaches patience, but also teaches that sometimes you must swim into the storm." Thompson looked around the table, and all in favor of striking Terminus Station. Every leader raised their hand or equivalent appendage, and the vote was unanimous. "Then we prepare," and Thompson said, "And Commander Lyra, you will lead the planning, and General Moore, you will command the ground forces, and Captain Martinez, you will coordinate the fleet." They had 6 weeks to prepare an attack on the most defended military base in the sector, and 6 weeks to train different species to work together, and 6 weeks to build weapons and ships. And Hope Lyra stood with Ember and Frost on an observation deck and watched ships arrive from across the Alliance, and Tarkesh fighters and Vorin cruisers and Kelf destroyers and Drex battleships and human vessels, and all of them preparing for war. Ember spoke in her mind, "And we are really doing this?" "Yes." And Lyra replied, "And we are challenging an empire." Frost added, "And we will probably die." "Probably." And Lyra agreed, "But we will die. Free below." Them soldiers trained together, and engineers shared designs, and scientists worked on new weapons, and an alliance was forming, and built not on conquest, but on common purpose, and built not on fear, but on hope. The Council had ruled for 10,000 years and thought themselves invincible, and they were about to learn that nothing lasts forever, and that free people fighting for their homes could defeat any empire. The countdown to battle had begun. The Alliance fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Terminus system, and 80 ships against one of the most powerful military installations in the galaxy. And Captain Martinez stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked at the tactical display, and beside her, Commander Lyra studied the station defenses, and Ember and Frost were in the launch bay, preparing for combat. Admiral Thompson commanded the fleet from Earth, and her holographic image appeared beside Martinez, and all ships report ready and ground. "Forces are prepared, and Commander Lyra, the station looks exactly as you described it should." And Lyra said, "And the Council does not change, and they believe their defenses are perfect." General Moore appeared on another screen, and his troops loaded in assault ships, and we have 3,000 soldiers ready to drop, and Tarkesh and Drex and Vorin and Kelf and human, and we will take that station. Terminus Station hung in orbit around a barren planet, and it was massive and shaped like a wheel, with 6 spokes, and each spoke contained barracks and weapons and docking bays, and the hub held the command center and shield generators, and the whole structure bristled with defensive guns and missile tubes and energy cannons. The Council garrison detected the Alliance fleet immediately, and alarms sounded throughout the station. And Admiral Kress commanded the defense, and she was a veteran of 100 battles, and she watched the approaching ships with contempt, and 80 vessels against Terminus. "And these rebels are fools. Launch all fighters and activate shields and target the largest ships first." And Kress ordered, "And send a message to Admiral Vex, and tell him the rebels are here." But before her fighters could launch, space rippled, and the quantum disruptors activated, and the same weapons that had defeated Vex now struck Terminus, and shields flickered, and weapons went offline, and emergency power systems struggled to compensate. Kress stared in shock, and "What is happening?" Station shook as the first wave of missiles struck, and kinetic projectiles slammed into the hull, and Vorin energy beams cut through armor, and Kelf torpedoes exploded against the docking bays, and the Council had never been attacked like this, and their defenses were designed to fight other Council forces and not this mix of technologies. Moore gave the order and dropped the assault teams. Dozens of small ships detached from the Alliance fleet and accelerated toward the station and inside. General Moore stood with his troops and checked his weapon, and beside him Queen Zara clicked her mandibles and Stonebreaker hefted a massive hammer, and Pulse flickered with energy and Wave Song adjusted her environment suit. The assault ships punched through the damaged hull and soldiers poured out into the corridors and fighting began immediately, and Council soldiers were well trained, but the Alliance forces fought with fury and desperation and they had all lost homes to the Council. And this was payback. Moore led a team toward the shield generators and they fought through 3 levels and his human soldiers using cover and tactics, while Tarkesh warriors charged with 4 weapons blazing and Drex smashed through walls, and Vorin phased through Bulkhead's crest sent reinforcements. But the Alliance had surprise and momentum, and they pushed deeper into the station. On the Defiance, Martinez coordinated the fleet battle, and the quantum disruptors gave them an advantage. But the station had backup systems and some weapons came back online and a Kelf destroyer took a direct hit and exploded, and a human cruiser lost engines and drifted away. Trailing atmosphere, Lyra watched the battle and remembered serving here and remembered friends who might still be on the station and war was ugly and necessary. And she activated her communication device and broadcast on all Council frequencies. And this is Commander Lyra, to all Council personnel. And you can surrender, or you can die and the choice is yours. Some soldiers laid down weapons and others fought harder. And the battle raged through the station. Moore reached the shield generator room and found it heavily defended, and 20 Council soldiers with heavy weapons and behind them the massive generators hummed with Power Stone. Breaker laughed and finally a real fight. The Drex charged forward and bullets bounced off his silicon hide and he swung his hammer and crushed 3 soldiers and Tarkesh warriors, flanked left and right and their weapons cutting down defenders and Vorin soldiers phased through walls and attacked from behind, and human troops provided covering fire, and within minutes the room was secured. Moore planted charges on the generators, and we have 2 minutes and move. They ran and the explosion was massive and ripped through 3 decks and the station's shields died completely, and now it was vulnerable. Martinez saw the shields collapse and all ships concentrate fire on the command hub and end this. The Alliance fleet focused their weapons and the hub took devastating damage and fire spread and systems failed, and Admiral Crest tried to coordinate the defense but communications were down and power was failing and her station was dying. A message came through on emergency channels and Admiral. This is Admiral Vex and we are 3 hours away and hold on. Crest laughed bitterly. And in 3 hours there will be nothing left to hold. She activated the self-destruct sequence, and if the station would fall then she would take the rebels with her. In the command center a Council technician saw what Crest had done, and horror filled him, and he was an elf named Torin, and he had served for 20 years, but he was tired of killing and tired of destroying worlds and he made a choice. Torin activated an emergency broadcast and attention all ships. And the Admiral has activated self-destruct and you have 15 minutes and evacuate the station. On the Defiance Lyra heard the warning. And Moore, get your people out now. Moore heard and was already moving and all teams fall back to extraction points in double time. The Alliance soldiers retreated and fighting running battles through corridors, and some did not make it and Council soldiers who had surrendered were offered evacuation, and some accepted and some chose to die. With their station Moore was the last one off, and he jumped into an assault ship as explosions rippled behind him and the ship accelerated away and cleared the station with seconds to spare. Terminus station exploded, and the detonation was visible from the planet below, and debris spread across orbit, and 600 Council soldiers died, but 300 had been evacuated by the Alliance. Martinez watched the station die and counted losses, and they had lost 9 ships and 400 soldiers, but they had destroyed the Council's main base in the sector. Thompson appeared on screen, and well done, Captain and Admiral. Vex will have received the news and he must choose now and attack Earth or defend Council space. Lyra knew Vex and he will return to Council territory and he cannot let this attack go unanswered. And Earth is safe for now, but for how long? And Martinez asked. Long enough, and Lyra replied, and long enough to build our strength, and long enough to spread the word, and long enough to show the galaxy that the Council can be defeated. The Alliance fleet regrouped and tended wounded and repaired ships, and among the rescued Council soldiers was the elf Torin, and he asked to speak with Lyra. They met in a conference room, and Torin bowed, and Commander, I am the one who warned you about the self-destruct. Why? And Lyra asked. Because I am tired of serving and tired of destroying. And when I heard you had joined the rebels, I knew there was another way, and he paused, and my family died when the council conquered our world, and I have served them for 20 years and hated every moment. Lyra understood and join us and help us free our people. Torin nodded, and I will, and whatever you need. Over the next days, more council soldiers asked to join, and some were elves and some were other species, and all of them tired of the council's endless wars, and the alliance grew. News of the battle spread across the galaxy, and whispered in secret and discussed in hidden meetings, and other conquered species heard and began to hope, and the council had seemed invincible, but Terminus proved they could bleed on. Earth celebrations erupted and humans danced in streets, but the leaders knew the truth, and this was just the beginning, and the council would not forgive and would not forget, and the real war was coming. Admiral Thompson met with the Alliance Council, and we hurt them, but we did not defeat them, and they have thousands of ships and millions of soldiers, and we need more allies and more time and more preparation, Queen. Zara agreed, and we must strike again and keep them off balance and show the galaxy we are serious. Stonebreaker pounded the table and let us attack their shipyards and their supply lines and make them fear us. Pulse added, and we should also send envoys to neutral species and convince them to join or at least stay neutral. Chen spoke up, and we need to share our story and let the galaxy know why we fight and show them the council can be beaten. Martinez looked at Lyra, and the council better than anyone. And what will they do next? Lyra thought carefully. And they will try to crush us quickly and make an example. And they will send their best commanders and their strongest fleets. And they will not stop until we are destroyed, or they are. Then we make it as hard as possible, and Thompson said, and we hit them everywhere, and we never give them time to recover. And we turn this into a war of attrition. Moore grinned, and humans are very good at those. The Alliance had won its first major victory and proved the council could be challenged, but the cost had been high, and the road ahead was long and uncertain. Lyra stood with Ember and Frost and looked at Earth below, and the blue planet that had reignited her hope and given her a reason to fight. We started something here, and Ember said in her mind. Yes, and Lyra replied, and something that will change the galaxy, Frost added, and we will probably not live to see the end. Probably not, and Lyra agreed, but others will, and they will be free because we fought. The three of them watched the stars, and somewhere out there the council was preparing. And somewhere out there other species were deciding whether to fight or hide. And somewhere out there the future was being written. The war for freedom had truly begun, and there would be no going back.